Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep into a fascinating intersection of technology where home electrification really meets the weekend warrior.
Hmm.
We're exploring the convergence of solar power and this, remarkably DIY-friendly HVAC sector, specifically these solar hybrid mini splits.
Our mission today is, I think, clarity. We have a whole stack of technical comparisons, a lot of deep Q&A docs on this new category, and we really need to distill what matters.
Right.
For you, the learner, the core question is this. Can a DIY installed solar system truly match the, let's say, cold weather performance and the long-term reliability of that professional legacy tier?
You're talking about Mitsubishi, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Can it match that while also delivering on this pretty radical promise of energy independence?
That's the tension. And before we even get into the specs, we have to establish the foundational concept. What is a solar hybrid unit?
Yeah.
Because we're not just talking about a standard mini split that happens to be running off a, separate grid-tied solar array.
Exactly. A true hybrid, like the Airspool or the EG4 models we're looking at, it fundamentally changes the power architecture. It accepts high-voltage DC current directly from the solar panels,
Straight into the unit's internal bus.
straight in, whereas a standard AC-powered unit takes AC, converts it internally to DC, and then has to convert it back to a specialized AC to run the motor.
So by skipping that whole initial conversion, you're eliminating the power losses. And that's how these manufacturers can make that, well, that astonishing claim of infinite SEER.
Mathematically, yes. I mean, if the energy input from your panels is essentially free and you're pulling 0 watts from the grid, your efficiency ratio becomes enormous.
It's a total paradigm shift in how an appliance is powered.
It is. It's not just efficient, it's autonomous.
But, like you said, autonomy only matters if the thing actually works when you need it most. So let's start with the power side. How much solar do I actually need to make this work?
Okay, so based on the technical requirements for, let's say, the standard 12,000 BTU unit, you should target around 1,500 watts of solar power.
1,500 watts. And that's actually surprisingly accessible.
It is. We're talking roughly 3 standard 500-watt panels.
And our sources confirm that, the panels alone for that might only cost you $500 or $600 today. That's before mounting and wiring, of course.
Correct. Now, to understand why 1,500 watts is the target, you have to look at consumption. The 12K unit, when the compressor is really running hard, it'll draw somewhere between 850 and 1,200 watts.
So a good rule of thumb is about 1 kilowatt per hour per ton of cooling.
That's a great way to think about it, and it makes scaling easy.
Right. So if I'm looking at a bigger 24,000 BTU unit, that's 2 tons, I should double it. So 3,000 watts of solar.
Precisely. A 3-ton or 36,000 BTU would then target 4,500 watts. But here's the critical anxiety point for most people.
Yeah.
What happens when the sun dips behind a cloud?
Yeah, exactly. Let's say I'm making 600 watts, but the unit needs 1,100. Does it just shut down?
And that's where the intelligence of the seamless grid blending comes in.
Yeah, fail safe.
It's the fail-safe that makes the whole system usable. If your solar drops, the system automatically draws the difference from the grid. In your example, 500 watts would be pulled from the utility.
So it's always prioritizing the free solar power first.
Always. And only supplementing with the grid when it has to. It's not an all-or-nothing deal.
Okay, so what about the opposite scenario? I'm generating 2,000 watts on a super sunny day, but the unit only needs 1,200.
Then the excess voltage and wattage is just, it's not converted or used. It's not an issue. You don't have to worry about overloading the unit. It's just headroom the system won't touch.
And this direct DC approach, it means you don't need to buy an external solar charge controller.
That's a huge simplification for the installer.
Mm-hmm.
The MPPT controller is integrated right into the outdoor unit, but this does make the voltage range critical.
Right, I saw this. The open circuit voltage has to stay within a specific corridor.
It does. A minimum of 80 volts just to turn the blower fan on, and a maximum of 380 volts that the controller can safely handle.
And crucially, the compressor itself needs at least 90 volts DC to kick on.
Right, so if you design that 1,500-watt setup correctly, you'll typically land in that sweet spot, 150 to 200 volts. You'll be well within the operating parameters.
Okay, let's address the off-grid fantasy. Running this on batteries at night. It sounds perfect, but there's a big voltage mismatch.
There is a significant challenge, yeah. Most common home batteries run at 48 volts, but this mini split needs at least 90 volts DC.
So you can't just plug a 48-volt battery into the unit's DC input.
You can't.
Wait, so if I already have a 48-volt battery system, I'd have to add a DC to DC step-up converter? Or convert the battery's DC to AC and then run it through the AC input?
And that's what most people do. They use their existing inverter.
But doesn't that kind of negate the whole ultra-efficient direct DC game?
It's a definite trade-off. By adding those conversion stages, you do lose that unique efficiency benefit. It's effective, but it adds cost and complexity. It makes true off-grid operation a lot harder than simple daytime use.
That complexity really defines the line between a weekend project and true off-grid integration. Let's pivot to the installation itself, because this is the real game changer for the DIYer.
The quick and easy design is what removes that enormous barrier to entry. I mean, historically installing a mini split required specialized tools.
A vacuum pump, gauges, all that stuff.
Right, to remove all the air and moisture from the lines. And if you mess that up, you just voided your warranty.
But the genius of these units is that they pre-charge the line set and they do the vacuum work at the factory. So for you, the user, it just becomes a mechanical connection.
You just connect the copper lines by hand with these quick connectors, twist them shut, and you're done.
And that one simple change removes, what, 90% of the possible failure points for a novice?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But there are still physical constraints. You're dealing with copper. You can't just fold it.
That's right. The sources really stress this. The copper line set has to be curved smoothly, like a train track, not bent at a sharp angle.
So when you're measuring the distance, the rule is to add about 3 extra feet of slack, just to ensure you have gentle curves and a safety margin.
And that slack becomes really important in tight spaces. Speaking of length, while most single-zone units come pre-configured for a 16-foot line set, the technical capacity is actually much greater.
Yeah, a big 36,000 BTU multi-zone unit can theoretically handle a line length up to 115 feet. That's a significant range.
Okay, let's touch on mounting. The outdoor unit can just sit on concrete pavers, but if you're in a snow climate, you really want to get it up on L brackets or a stand.
Get it up out of the snow and debris, absolutely. And if you're mounting it to a wall, especially stucco, always use a universal kit with a horizontal bar to span 2 studs.
You need that structural support.
You do. You don't want it hanging off the cladding.
Now, what about the indoor head unit? I know high placement is generally better for air circulation, but I heard a specific constraint about ceiling clearance.
Yeah. You need about 8 inches of clearance from the ceiling. And the reason is actually pretty specific. It's not for airflow.
It's to get to the bracket, right?
It's to access the mounting bracket during installation. If it's flush against the ceiling, you literally can't get the unit secured onto its backing plate.
And one detail that feels like it came straight from a user forum, if you run the lines out the left side of the indoor unit, you need a special extended line set stub option. Why?
It's a geometry problem. The quick connectors themselves are bulky. So if the lines exit immediately to the left and the unit is flush on the wall, those connectors would be trapped behind the housing. You couldn't access them.
So that stub just moves the connection point out from behind the unit's chassis.
Exactly.
And finally, the electrical flexibility here is impressive. These things run on anything from 110 to 240 volts.
Right. They advertise the 12K unit at 120V in the US, just because that's the most common breaker setup for that size.
And the standard 12K model, the MS-12, is so efficient it only draws about 8 or 9 amps. It can go on a standard 15-amp circuit.
But, and this is important, but if you get the enhanced cold climate version, the HS-12 Superheat, you do need to upgrade to a 20-amp breaker.
Okay, moving from installation to performance. This is where the market really starts to separate. For anyone living where the temperature consistently drops below freezing, the primary concern is simple.
Will this thing work when it's 10 degrees Fahrenheit?
Or will it turn into a useless box? And that concern is valid. And that's where the key technological differentiator comes in, this enhanced vapor injection, or EVI technology.
EVI is the cold climate separator.
Absolutely. The Airspool HS series incorporates EVI, and the massive takeaway is that their operational envelope extends down to negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit for heating.
And crucially, that matches the performance limits of the high-end professional systems, like the Mitsubishi Hyperheat.
So what is EVI actually doing inside the compressor to maintain that capacity in such brutal cold?
It's boosting the mass flow rate of refrigerant. In extreme cold, the refrigerant's density drops, and that reduces the unit's heating capacity. EVI fights this by injecting a little bit of liquid refrigerant mid-stroke into the compressor. This cools the compressor, which is great for durability, and it also significantly boosts the total mass of refrigerant being cycled.
Which allows it to maintain heat output even as the outside air temperature just plummets.
Exactly. And without EVI, what happens to those other hybrid models?
They fall off a cliff. The standard hybrid chassis, which includes the MS-12 and the competitor EG4 units, they're limited to heating down to only about 5 degrees Fahrenheit.
That is a significant performance difference if you live anywhere north of, say, the mid-Atlantic.
Let's just quickly review the competitive landscape here. We know Mitsubishi is the gold standard. Reliable, quiet 19 dB indoors, which is basically a whisper.
But completely hostile to DIY. They'll void your warranty on a self-install, which drives their total cost of ownership through the roof.
Then you have Mr. Cool, the current DIY champion. Their strength is accessibility, and they use that R454B refrigerant, which is a smart move for future U.S. regulations.
But their major flaw in this comparison is that they're AC only. No direct DC solar input. And their warranty is, let's just say it's highly conditional.
And then there's the direct rival, Signature Solar's EG4. They're aggressively priced. They use the same die OEM parts as the non-EVI Airspool, but they have that 5 degree Ceph heating limit, and more concerning.
The reported firmware instability.
With the grid blending, yeah.
Yes. We've seen reports that the EG4 system sometimes acts binary. It's either running on solar or it's on the grid, rather than seamlessly blending the two.
Wait, that sounds like a massive vulnerability. If it can't seamlessly blend, that completely undermines the whole point of a solar hybrid system. You can't have your heat source just flickering.
It seems to be a real frustration point tied to their firmware. And that brings us to support and warranty, which is, paramount for a DIY product.
Right.
Airspool is trying to mitigate that risk with what they call a 5-year happiness guarantee. The full year of unconditional returns, plus 4 years of parts and labor assistance.
And you contrast that with the EG4 model. Our sources indicate support is often weaker, requiring you to escalate issues to the overseas manufacturer.
Which can lead to weeks of delay. For a homeowner relying on this for winter heat, that delay it's just unacceptable.
And just a quick reminder on sizing. The simple rule of thumb holds. 12,000 BTU covers about 500 square feet. 24,000 covers around 1,000.
And it's worth noting, these inverter units can slow way down to a minimum of 250 to 300 watts. They also have a low temp set point of 61 degrees Arafels, which is perfect for keeping a shop or a garage just above freezing.
All right, let's bring this all together with the economics. This is the payoff. The total cost of ownership analysis is where these solar hybrids just truly distance themselves.
When you look at the financials in a high electricity cost area, let's say a challenging 20 cents per kilowatt hour, the Airspool HS12, even with its higher upfront cost, delivers the lowest 10-year TCO. We're talking 3,606
And that is significantly lower than the AC-only Mr. Cool at over 5,000. And it's less than half the staggering $8,700 for the professionally installed Mitsubishi.
The entire financial win is driven by that energy offset from running on free solar all day.
And here's the crucial aha moment that everyone needs to lock in. The tax credit leverage.
Yes.
Yes.
Because the solar component is integral to the HVAC unit, the entire system, the unit, the panels, the wiring, all of it, is eligible for the 30% residential clean energy credit, 25D.
30%. That instantly drops the net cost of the system dramatically. It narrows that price gap with the non-solar guys almost immediately.
And then the solar savings kick in, making it the overwhelming financial choice over the medium term.
For those looking at bigger homes, configuration is flexible too, right? A 36K multi-split can handle different combos.
They can. You could run 2 18,000 BTU heads or maybe 3 12,000 BTU heads. It gives you a lot of flexibility for zone climate control.
And logistics are pretty straightforward. They ship from Las Vegas, usually via UPS. The 12K unit package is heavy, about 120 pounds, but they do subsidize the shipping.
Yeah, they only charge you for the outdoor unit at a discounted rate. International shipping is also available to Canada, Australia, but you're on the hook for duties and taxes.
And for any of you ready to explore this, we did confirm a standing discount code. Harvest $150. That'll get you $150 off the MS12 or the HS12 models.
One last note on connectivity. The units use the Tuya Smart platform for Wi-Fi. And the most common troubleshooting point by far is making sure your home network is on 2.4 gigahertz, not 5 gigahertz. The unit just won't connect otherwise.
So what does this all mean for you, the homeowner, moving forward?
I think the key takeaway is that the criteria for the perfect mini-split have fundamentally changed.
It's not just about BTUs anymore, a high SEER number.
No, it's about balancing that upfront cost, achieving the gold standard cold weather performance that you get from EVI, and, securing energy autonomy.
The DIY solar hybrid segment successfully bridges that gap. It's got the performance of the best legacy systems, the installation simplicity of the leading DIY brands, and it introduces that transformative element of energy independence. And this signals a much larger trend than just, saving money on your HVAC bill. Here's where it connects to the bigger picture.
The rise of these solar hybrid appliances signals a definitive market shift. High-draw residential loads are becoming functionally independent of utility infrastructure, at least during peak times.
So how will this growing independence from grid pricing and from, politically motivated policy changes like the erosion of net metering, NEM 3.0, how will that change how we value our home appliances in the next decade?
It forces us to ask a new question. Is my HVAC system just climate control, or is it now a critical component of my personal power plant?
That is a fantastic question to leave you with. Is your appliance infrastructure an energy liability, or is it an asset? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
Always a pleasure.